German is known for being one of the more difficult languages to learn, and that's why it's important to have the right mindset when we start learning it. So in this video, I would like to talk about how to approach learning German in order to make sure that we are successful at it. If you're new here, welcome to Learn German with Learngerman. My name is Alex Senoner. I've learned more than 10 languages in my life so far, and in these videos and on this channel, I draw from my language learning experience in order to teach you German. So one of the questions that a lot of people have is how long does it take to learn German? And this is a question that, in my opinion, does not really make so much sense, and you probably should not focus on it so much. Why is that? Because learning a language, not just German, but any language, it's not a binary thing. It's not like you don't know the language and then you suddenly know the language. You know the language gradually more and more. After the first lesson, you can say one sentence probably, and that's already speaking German, even though you're only saying one sentence, but you're already saying something in the language. Then after a week, you can probably say more sentences. After a month, you can say more sentences. You can perhaps understand some conversations and so on. So you gradually can speak and understand more and more. And it's not like after 5 months you don't know the language and then after 6 months you suddenly know it. So that's why I would not focus on this question so much. However, there are obviously statistics that say that, in order to reach a comfortable level in the language, in order to be able to have a conversation in the language, it usually takes 1 year, 2 years, and so on. Usually these numbers are given in hours because it depends on how many hours you invest, because you can be studying 500 hours a year or 200 hours a year or only 20 hours a year. So talking about how many months it takes or how many years it takes also is a little bit difficult because it depends on how much effort you put in every day, every week. But in my experience, every language that I've learned so far, it took me at least 1 year in order to reach a level where I felt comfortable having conversations, unless it's a language that was very closely related to one that I already spoke, like learning Dutch from German or learning Portuguese from Spanish. And even there, until you really feel comfortable having a conversation, you need to really listen a lot. You need to really speak a lot, read a lot, because you need to go through most scenarios. Because in order to know how to say this or how to say that, you need to have heard it at least once. You need to have heard at least once or have read somewhere how to talk about driving a car, how to talk about going to the supermarket, what you would say in this situation and what you would say in that situation. So there are so many situations in which we use the language, and there are so many possible expressions that we use in different situations. And so it just takes a lot of time to go through all those situations, to have the experience of all these situations in order to know how you would express yourself in German in that situation. So if it's difficult to say how long it takes to learn German, then how do we know whether we are making progress? Progress is an interesting question because there are, in my experience, two types of progress. There is the subjective feeling of progress, your feeling of how much progress you've made in the language, and there is the objective progress. The objective progress is just, for example, how many words you know in the language, how many grammar rules you know, how many expressions you know, and so on. So the more things you know about the language, the more progress you've made. Subjective progress is quite different. That's your own feeling of how much progress you have made. And that changes a lot throughout your language learning journey. Your objective progress generally keeps going forward because the more you study, the more you speak, the more you listen, the more you objectively make progress. But subjectively, it depends a lot on what you compare yourself to. Because progress means, of course, that we are further ahead compared to some other state. So progress implies that we compare ourselves to something else, to a different time. And when you learn a language, and this applies to a lot of things, not just language learning, when you start, There are generally, in my experience, two phases which you go through. When you start learning a language, you have a very strong feeling of progress. And why is that? That is because you're comparing yourself to when you didn't know the language. So when you start, you know nothing, and then you know something. So that's a very big progress. And that can last for many weeks, many months. You always feel like, wow, a few months ago I didn't know anything, and now I know a lot. So you keep comparing yourself to the initial state when you didn't know anything. But at some point, when you become more comfortable having conversations, when you feel like you understand more when you watch a video, or you understand more when you read something, at some point your aim changes, your reference point changes. You're no longer comparing yourself to when you started. Now you start comparing yourself to where you want to be. I want to be able to speak more fluently. I want to be able to understand more. So you change from looking back to looking ahead to where you want to go. And that's when you start feeling that there is a lack. I'm not there yet. I've studied a lot, but I'm not yet able to understand. I'm not yet able to express myself in the way that I want. And this is where a lot of people get frustrated, obviously, because they feel like I've already invested so much time. Why am I still not able to express myself? Why do I still struggle so much to understand, even though objectively you are still making a lot of progress? So the lesson is to know and expect that this is going to happen, and to just keep on going, because we know that objectively we are making progress. So at that point, what we need is patience and keep on going, going. And at some point you will overcome this feeling, and you will reach another stage where you feel like, wow, now I have made a lot more progress. So what about grammar? German is famous for having rather complicated grammar. And some people say, should you study a lot of grammar at the beginning? Should you not study any grammar at all? And some people talk about grammar as if it's something that you can study, but you don't have to, like it's something optional. And that is also something which doesn't make sense, because grammar is everything. There are different types of grammar. If I say one sentence, if I say, I eat an apple, ich esse einen Apfel, I'm already using grammar. I'm already using, if I say one sentence like, I drink water, ich trinke Wasser, I'm already using grammar. I'm using word order. In German, it's ich trinke Wasser, and not ich Wasser trinke or Wasser ich trinke. So when you already learn such a basic sentence, you're already learning grammar, and you may think, well, of course it's I drink water and not water I drink. But there are languages where they say I water drink or water I drink. So grammar is everything. You know, if you learn the first sentence, you're already learning grammar. And that's why I would not look at it as, should I invest a lot of time in learning grammar or not? But I would look at it in terms of what is essential grammar and what is less essential grammar. And by essential, I mean, is it critical for comprehension and communication or not? So, as you know, German, for example, has genders. Every noun in German is either masculine, feminine, or neutral. And based on that, the article, which in English is always the, in German can be der or die or das. Now, is this critical for comprehension? Not really. If you get the article wrong, people still understand what you're saying, because the word house in German is Haus. And whether you say die Haus or der Haus or das Haus, people understand that you're talking about a house, right? So that is grammar which you should learn at some point, but which I would not obsess about, because it's not critical for comprehension. So what kind of grammar is critical for comprehension? I have, through my years of experience, come up with a method which I call Beacon, which I will explain and discuss in more detail in another video. But it's basically about learning the basic grammatical constructions in a language. These are, for example, how to say, I do this because of that, or I do this but that, or I want this, therefore that. So how to form these sentence patterns, which are very basic forms of expression, because these are used in order to justify something, in order to contrast something, in order to continue a sentence, and so on. And others are, for example, how to ask questions and how to negate. So how to say what is not. So when you start learning German, I would focus first on learning those expressions, because, but, therefore, and so on. And things like gender, how to use the masculine, feminine, how declensions work in German. It's not like you shouldn't look at that at all. You should look at that. You should have an understanding of how it works. You should know that there is such a thing as genitive case, dative case, and that if you see des Hauses or dem Haus, those are just different forms of the article das or the article der. But I would not sit down and try to memorize by heart das Haus, des Hauses, dem Haus, das Haus. Because that's not how you will learn it. You will only learn how to use the articles correctly by hearing them again and again and again. If you hear again and again someone say, ich lerne mit dem Buch, and then you keep saying it, mit dem Buch, at some point you know when it's mit, it's just this pattern, mit dem Buch. So what helps is to look at it in terms of patterns. When I say with the book, that pattern is mit dem Buch, without thinking about is it neutral or masculine, is it dative or genitive. Don't think about that. Just memorize that with the book is mit dem Buch. If you apply that, if you just learn these patterns, then in my experience, that is how you are much more likely to memorize and to learn these grammatical constructions. So yeah, that's a lot which we covered about the mindset for learning German. I would really like you to write down in the comments any questions that you have about learning German, and I'll make a video answering those questions. Thank you so much for watching this, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.